My name is Lily, and I'm 32 years old. On my sister's wedding day, my parents didn't even look at me. They walked right past me in the church vestibule as if I were a ghost, a complete stranger. Their eyes fixed solely on my younger sister, the bride, their perfect golden child. But a few hours later, during the reception, when my gift was announced, half the room stood up and applauded. And it was only then, in the deafening silence of their own shock, that my family finally understood who they had been taking for granted all along. What they didn't know was that my gift was never for them. It was a promise I had made to my late father, a secret I had held for 5 long years. If you're watching this right now, and you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you about the gift that changed everything, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more true stories about finding your voice when the people who are supposed to love you most refuse to listen. Before that fateful wedding day, my life was a carefully constructed garden. As a landscape architect, my job is to create beauty, order, and harmony from empty or chaotic spaces. It's a fitting profession because for as long as I can remember, that has been my role in my family too. I am the fixer, the planner, the quiet and reliable root system that holds everything together, while my younger sister, Sarah, has always been the beautiful, delicate flower that everyone gathers to admire. Our family dynamic was set in stone from childhood. Sarah, just 2 years my junior, was the artist, the dreamer, the one with the infectious laugh and the dazzling smile. She could light up a room, but she left a trail of emotional and financial chaos in her wake. I was the practical one, the straight-A student, the one who worked a part-time job in high school not for pocket money, but to help my parents cover the costs of Sarah's latest passion, be it ballet lessons, equestrian camp, or a spontaneous trip to Europe after graduation that she just had to take for inspiration. My mother, Helen, was the primary architect of this imbalance. To her, Sarah's whims were needs, and my needs were, well, they were secondary. I remember when it came time for college. My parents had a modest savings account for each of us. The week before my tuition deposit was due, the money in my account vanished. When I confronted them, my mother explained with a sigh, as if I were being unreasonable. Honey, Sarah had a wonderful opportunity to study art in Florence for the summer. She was so excited. You're the responsible one. We knew you'd figure it out. And I did. I took out loans. I worked 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. I graduated with honors and a mountain of debt, while Sarah returned from Italy with a portfolio of mediocre paintings and a renewed sense of entitlement. My father, David, was a quieter presence. He was a kind man, a high school history teacher who saw the good in everyone, but he was no match for my mother's force of will. He would sometimes pull me aside and slip me a $20 bill with an apologetic look in his eyes, whispering, "For gas, Lilybug. Don't tell your mother." He saw the injustice, but he never felt strong enough to stop it. The dynamic only intensified after I graduated and started my career. I landed a coveted position at a prestigious architecture firm in the city, working tirelessly to pay down my loans and build a name for myself. Sarah, meanwhile, drifted from one creative endeavor to another, each one funded by a fresh infusion of cash from my parents, who had recently downsized their home. When Sarah decided she wanted to be a jewelry designer, they paid for thousands of dollars in beads and silver. When she declared she was a photographer, they bought her top-of-the-line camera equipment. None of it ever stuck. The beads gathered dust, and the camera was eventually pawned to pay for a security deposit on an apartment she couldn't afford. Through it all, I was the one they called for real help. When the car my parents had co-signed for Sarah got repossessed, I was the one who drove 2 hours in the middle of the night to pick her up. When she couldn't make rent, it was my credit card that covered the difference, with promises of repayment that evaporated like morning mist. Then, 5 years ago, everything shifted. My father was diagnosed with a fast-moving, aggressive cancer. The last 6 months of his life were a blur of hospital visits, whispered consultations, and the hollow, antiseptic smell of corridors I'll never forget. During that time, I became the family's functional head. I coordinated with doctors, managed the insurance paperwork, cooked meals, and sat by his bedside for hours, reading him history books while my mother and Sarah dissolved into a puddle of grief that rendered them incapable of practical tasks. I didn't mind. It was my dad. I would have done anything for him. Sarah, meanwhile, found the situation too depressing, and her visits became shorter and less frequent. My mother clung to Sarah for emotional support, while she relied on me for everything else. The week before my father passed away, he called me into his hospital room alone. His voice was a fragile whisper, but his eyes were clear and full of a love that felt ancient and profound. He handed me a thick sealed envelope. "This is for you, Lilybug," he rasped. "Don't open it until I'm gone. And don't tell your mother or sister about it. Not yet." He gripped my hand, his knuckles bony but his hold surprisingly firm. "You have spent your whole life building things for other people. It's time you built something for yourself. Promise me." I promised, tears streaming down my face. He died 2 days later. In the aftermath, I handled everything. The funeral arrangements, the eulogy, the mountain of paperwork that comes with death. Sarah cried beautifully at the service, leaning on her new boyfriend, Mark. My mother was inconsolable, and I was the strong one, the pillar, the one who held everyone up until the last guest had gone home and I could finally collapse in the silence of my own apartment. I kept my promise and didn't open the letter for a month. When I finally did, I found 2 things inside. The first was a cashier's check for $50,000. It was his entire life insurance policy, a policy I never knew existed. The second was a 10-page handwritten letter. In it, my father poured out his heart. He apologized for not being stronger, for allowing my mother's favoritism to overshadow my needs. He told me how proud he was of my strength, my talent, my quiet resilience. And he gave me a final instruction. Use this money to start your own business. Don't give a penny of it to them. This is your seed to grow your own garden, free and clear. Build something that will outlast all of us. This is my true legacy, not the house or the savings, but you. I followed his wishes to the letter. I quit my job, used the $50,000 as seed money, and launched Terra Firma Designs, my own landscape architecture firm. The first 2 years were grueling, but my father's belief in me was a constant source of fuel. My business began to flourish. I developed a reputation for innovative, sustainable designs, and my client list grew to include some of the city's most prominent residents. My family's reaction was muted. They saw my success not as a result of my hard work or my father's faith in me, but as a new, more reliable resource for them. They never asked about the business, only about what it could provide. They didn't know about my father's gift. They just assumed I was doing well. I thought I could handle one more event, one more day of being the supportive background character. I had no idea this wedding wasn't just going to be the biggest day of my sister's life, it was going to be the end of mine as I knew it. The storm began, as most family storms do, with a seemingly joyful announcement. It was a Sunday dinner at my mother's house, about 8 months before the wedding. Sarah, with a theatrical flair that was all her own, stood up, held out her left hand where a modest diamond glittered, and announced that Mark had proposed. My mother burst into tears of joy, hugging Sarah so tightly I thought she might break. I was genuinely happy for her. Mark seemed like a decent guy, a project manager for a construction company, and he appeared to genuinely adore my sister's chaotic energy. I offered my sincere congratulations, gave her a warm hug, and told her I was thrilled for them both. The initial glow of the engagement, however, quickly gave way to the cold, hard logistics of wedding planning. And in my family, logistics were my department. A week later, my mother called me. "Lily, honey," she began, her voice brimming with excitement. "Sarah has her heart set on a garden wedding at the Botanical Gardens. You know, that beautiful pavilion overlooking the rose garden? It would be a dream come true for her. And of course, we all immediately thought of you." I smiled, picturing the venue. It was a stunning location, a blank canvas that I could transform into something truly magical. "Of course, Mom. I would be honored to design the space for her. It would be my gift to them." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that's so sweet of you, honey," my mother said, but her tone was a little strained. "And we appreciate that. But Well, planning a wedding is so much more than just the flowers, isn't it? And so it began. It turned out that their vision of my help was not limited to my professional expertise. At the first official planning meeting held at a chic cafe where my mother and Sarah ordered expensive lattes and pastries while I drank black coffee, they laid out their expectations. They unfurled a massive binder, already overflowing with magazine clippings and fabric swatches. They talked about a guest list of 200 people, a couture designer for Sarah's dress, a 10-piece live band, and a 5-course meal from the city's most exclusive caterer. I listened, my mind doing the frantic math. The wedding they were describing would cost, at a minimum, $100,000. Mark's salary was solid but not extravagant. My mother was living on my father's modest pension and Social Security. Sarah's current career as an influencer barely covered her rent. I finally cleared my throat. "This all sounds incredible," I said carefully. "What does your budget look like?" Sarah waved her hand dismissively, as if I'd asked a rude question. "Oh, we're still working out the details, but we know it's going to be a stretch." My mother then turned to me, her eyes gleaming with a familiar, presumptive warmth. "That's why we're so lucky to have you, Lily. With your business doing so well, we knew you'd want to help your sister have the wedding of her dreams. After all, family is everything." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. My success was not my own. It was a communal family resource, to be tapped as needed for Sarah's happiness. They weren't asking for a contribution. They were informing me of my financial obligation. I felt that old, familiar feeling wash over me, a toxic cocktail of resentment, frustration, and a deeply ingrained sense of duty. Part of me wanted to scream, to remind them of the student loans I was still paying off, of the long hours I worked, of the fact that my business's success was built on a foundation of my father's secret, final gift to me. But another part, the part that had been conditioned for decades, just wanted to keep the peace. So, I nodded. "I'll help however I can," I murmured, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. My mother beamed, reaching across the table to pat my hand. "We knew we could count on you. You've always been the responsible one." The initial shock of their audacity slowly morphed into a quiet resolve. I decided I would help, but on my own terms. I would give them a generous gift, a significant amount of money that would genuinely help with the costs. But I would not give them a blank check. I would not allow them to bleed my business dry for a one-day fantasy. I would set a boundary. That night, I spent hours poring over my finances, trying to determine a number that felt both generous and sustainable. A number that would prove my love and support without sacrificing the future my father had wanted for me. I settled on a figure that made my stomach clench with its size, but I knew it was the right thing to do. I felt a small flicker of hope that perhaps this grand gesture would finally earn me a measure of the respect and appreciation I had craved for so long. I agreed, of course. What else could I do? But as I drove home that night, a cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't just about flowers and a venue. It was about my entire family history repeating itself on the grandest stage possible. And I was about to be the main sponsor for a celebration where I was already beginning to feel like an unwelcome guest. The 8 months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in being made to feel simultaneously essential and invisible. My life became a whirlwind of vendor calls, budget spreadsheets, and frantic text messages from my mother and sister, all while trying to run my own demanding business. The promised financial contribution was just the beginning. My time, energy, and expertise were now considered on demand, free of charge wedding planning services. The slight started small, like a series of paper cuts, each one insignificant on its own but collectively leaving me bleeding. The first incident was the dress shopping. I took a precious weekday off, rescheduling 2 important client meetings, to join my mother and Sarah at an exclusive bridal boutique. I was excited, genuinely looking forward to sharing this iconic moment with my sister. But from the moment we walked in, I was treated like an assistant. My mother and Sarah were whisked away to a private viewing area with champagne, while I was left to awkwardly trail behind, holding their coats and purses. When Sarah emerged in the first dress, a cloud of tulle and lace, They turned to each other for opinions, their heads bent together in a private conference. When I offered a suggestion about a different silhouette that might be more flattering, Sarah just wrinkled her nose and said, "Oh, Lily, you have such practical taste. This is my day to be a princess." My mother nodded in agreement. For 2 hours I sat on a velvet settee, offering comments that were consistently ignored, until they finally settled on a dress that cost more than my first car. As they gushed at the register, my mother turned to me with a wide smile and said, "It's a bit over budget, but we'll find a way to make it work, won't we?" The "we" was clearly directed at me. The second cut was deeper. I spent over 40 hours creating a detailed, professional landscape design for the botanical garden venue. I drew up blueprints, created a 3D rendering, and sourced rare, beautiful flowers that would be in peak bloom on her wedding day. It was a labor of love, a piece of my professional soul that I was offering as a gift. I presented it to them at my mother's house, my heart thumping with pride. My mother glanced at it for less than a minute. Sarah scrolled through the renderings on my tablet while simultaneously scrolling through her Instagram feed. "It's nice, I guess," Sarah said, her eyes still glued to her phone. "But I saw this thing on Pinterest with, like, a whole wall of donuts. Can we do that instead? And I want more pink. Like, a lot more pink." They proceeded to dismantle my entire design, replacing my carefully curated vision with a hodgepodge of fleeting social media trends, all while talking about my work as if I were a hired hand, not a family member pouring her heart into a gift. They had no respect for my time, my talent, or my professional judgment. The third incident happened at the bridal shower, which I co-hosted with Sarah's maid of honor. I not only planned the menu and decorations, but also paid for the majority of the event, wanting to create a beautiful, memorable day for my sister. As Sarah opened her gifts, she would offer polite but brief thanks for the kitchen appliances and linens. But when she opened a pair of designer shoes from one of her wealthy friends, she shrieked with delight, holding them up for everyone to see. My mother, sitting beside her, announced loudly, "Oh, Sarah, look! People who truly know you need a little glamour in your life." The implication was stinging and clear. My contribution, the food everyone was eating, the elegant room they were sitting in was merely practical, functional. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't from someone who truly knew her. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. I looked around the room, and I caught the eye of my cousin, Chloe. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile, a silent acknowledgement that she had heard it too. That look from Chloe was the beginning of my quiet awakening. A few days later, we met for coffee. Chloe had always been on the periphery of our family's core drama, which gave her a clear-eyed perspective. "Lily, it's honestly incredible how much you're doing for this wedding," she said, stirring her latte. "I don't know how you manage it. Do Sarah and your mom ever actually, say thank you?" Her question, so simple and direct, hit me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to say, "Of course they do," but the words wouldn't come, because they didn't. Not really. They said thanks, in a casual, offhand way, the way you thank a delivery person for dropping off a package. There was no genuine appreciation, no recognition of the personal or financial sacrifices I was making. "I guess they just show their appreciation in different ways," I said weakly, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. Chloe just looked at me, her expression full of a kindness I hadn't realized I was starving for. "You deserve to be appreciated, Lily. You're not their employee." Her words stayed with me, echoing in my mind as the final, most egregious demand was made. It was 2 weeks before the wedding. My mother called me, her voice tight with manufactured panic. "Lily, we have a disaster. The caterer just called. The final payment is due on Friday, and with a few other unexpected costs, we're short." I waited, knowing what was coming. "How short?" I asked, my voice flat. $10,000, she whispered, as if the amount was a terrible secret. I was silent. I had already contributed a staggering amount, far more than I had initially planned. "Lily, are you there?" my mother pressed. "We're counting on you, honey. Mark's parents have contributed what they can. There's no one else to ask. You wouldn't want your sister's wedding to be ruined over this, would you? The emotional blackmail was so blatant, so shameless, that it was almost breathtaking. My father's words from his letter echoed in my mind. Don't give a penny of it to them. But the conditioning of a lifetime is a powerful force. The thought of my sister's wedding day being ruined, and knowing it would forever be my fault in their eyes, was a weight I couldn't bear. I transferred the money, my hand shaking as I clicked the button. It wasn't about the amount anymore. It was about the assumption. The complete and utter certainty they had that I was their bottomless bank account, their emotional and financial safety net, obligated to catch them every time they leaped without looking. That was the moment I realized I wasn't a guest of honor or even a cherished family member at this upcoming wedding. I was simply a line item in the budget, a problem solver they kept on retainer. And as I stared at the confirmation of the transfer on my screen, a dangerous thought sparked in my mind. What happens when the sponsor decides to pull the funding? The morning of the wedding arrived. A perfect, sun-drenched day in early June. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. I woke up with a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, a sense of dread masquerading as exhaustion. I had been up until 2 a.m. The night before, at the venue, personally arranging the floral centerpieces after the florist they'd hired had delivered arrangements that were, in Sarah's tearful words, the wrong shade of blush. I had fixed it, of course. I always did. I arrived at my mother's house, where the bridal party was getting ready, armed with coffee and pastries for everyone. When I walked in, the scene was one of cheerful, chaotic energy. Hairstylists and makeup artists buzzed around. Mimosas were flowing. My sister, Sarah, was sitting in a chair like a queen, holding court while people fussed over her. My mother was flitting around, her face flushed with excitement. I set the coffee and pastries on the kitchen counter. "Good morning, everyone," I said, trying to inject some warmth into my voice. My mother glanced over, saw the food, and said, "Oh, wonderful, Lily. Put them over there. Girls, Lily brought breakfast," before immediately turning back to admire Sarah's hair. Sarah didn't even look up. No one said thank you. I was the caterer, the delivery service. I went to find my dress, a simple but elegant navy blue gown I'd bought for the occasion. It was hanging in the guest room. As I was getting dressed, I could hear their laughter echoing from the other room, the excited chatter of a celebration I felt completely detached from. I felt like a stagehand at a play, essential to the production but invisible to the audience. The first real blow came when it was time for the photographer to take the pre-ceremony family photos. The photographer, a brisk, efficient woman, started arranging everyone in the backyard. "Okay, I need the bride with her mother and father," she called out. My mother and Mark's father stood proudly beside Sarah. "Now, just the sisters." I moved to stand next to Sarah, forcing a smile. We took a few awkward shots. Then the photographer said, "Okay, perfect. Now, just the bride with her parents again. And Mark, you can jump in too." I started to step away, but my mother placed a hand on my arm. "Lily, honey, could you just stand over there for a minute? We want to get a few shots of just our family." My own mother was asking me to step out of a family photo. My blood ran cold. She meant her new family, her, Sarah, and her new son-in-law. I was an accessory, no longer part of the core unit. I watched from the sidelines as they laughed and posed. A perfect, happy family. I had never felt so alone in my entire life. But that wasn't the moment. That was just a prelude. The breaking point, the Jortnook Tranley, happened at the church. The ceremony was beautiful, I have to admit. The venue looked breathtaking, a testament to my unpaid labor. Sarah looked radiant. As I sat in the front pew, I felt a pang of genuine emotion, a flicker of the sisterly love that lay buried under years of resentment. I thought, maybe this is a new beginning. Maybe after today, things will be different. I was so naive. After the ceremony, as guests filed out into the sunshine, the wedding planner instructed the immediate family to stay behind for more photos at the altar. I stood with the group, waiting for direction. My mother was busy fussing with the train of Sarah's dress. My sister was giggling with Mark. They started with big group shots, and then the photographer began breaking it down. "Okay, bride and groom with the bride's parents," they posed. "Now, Let's add in the groom's parents. They posed again. Then my mother, in a moment of such casual cruelty it stole the breath from my lungs, turned to me and said, "Lily, why don't you go on ahead to the reception and make sure everything is set up correctly with the caterer? We'll be along in a bit." She was dismissing me. On her daughter's wedding day, in front of my new brother-in-law and his family, my own mother was sending me away, relegating me to the role of an event coordinator, not a family member. She didn't want me in the most important photos of the day. She wanted me to go check on the staff. I looked at her, searching her face for any sign that she understood what she had just done. There was nothing. Just a distracted, slightly impatient look. I glanced at Sarah. She was busy looking at the back of the photographer's camera, completely oblivious. Or maybe, and this thought was even more painful, she just didn't care. That was it. That was the moment. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside my soul. The years of quiet endurance, of biting my tongue, of making myself smaller to let her shine brighter, it all evaporated. I wasn't angry. The feeling was something colder, clearer. It was acceptance. I finally accepted that they would never see me. They were incapable of seeing me as anything other than a resource, a tool, a solution to their problems. In their story, I was a supporting character with no arc of my own. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I simply nodded, my face a calm, placid mask. "Of course, Mom," I said, my voice steady. "I'll go make sure everything is perfect for Sarah's big day." I turned and walked out of the church alone. The sunlight outside was blinding. As I walked to my car, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt free. The burden of their expectations, a weight I had carried my entire life, had been lifted. They had finally made it clear where I stood, and in doing so, they had unknowingly given me the greatest gift of all, permission to finally choose myself. As I drove to the reception venue, a new plan began to form in my mind. The generous check I had planned to give them as a wedding gift was still in my purse. But that was a gift from the old Lily, the one who craved their approval. The new Lily, the one who was born in that cold church aisle, had a different kind of gift in mind. It was a gift that would honor my father's true legacy. It was a gift they would never see coming. The drive from the church to the reception venue took 20 minutes. But in that short span of time, a lifetime of suppressed feelings crystallized into a single, unshakable purpose. I was no longer operating on autopilot, driven by obligation. I was now the architect of my own response, and the blueprints were forming in my mind with stunning clarity. My secret weapon wasn't money or power. It was the truth. It was the letter my father had left me, the words of which were now seared into my memory. "Build something that lasts, Lily. It's time you built something for yourself." For 5 years, I had interpreted that as building my business. But in that moment, I realized he meant something more. He meant for me to build a life, a sense of self, that wasn't dependent on their validation. I pulled into the parking lot of the Botanical Gardens, but didn't go inside right away. I parked in a quiet corner, turned off the engine, and pulled the checkbook from my purse. The check I had written to Sarah and Mark, for an amount that would have covered their honeymoon and then some, felt foreign in my hands. It represented a transaction from a bankrupt emotional account. I slowly tore it into 4 precise pieces and let them fall into the empty passenger seat. That debt was now paid in full. Then I reached into my glove compartment and pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. It was the journal where, 2 years ago, I had transcribed my father's entire letter, not wanting the original to fade. I read his words again, not with the sadness of grief, but with the fire of inspiration. He had given me the seed money. He had given me his blessing. And he had given me the core of an idea that was now blossoming into a full-fledged plan. My gift to Sarah wouldn't be cash. Cash was easy, impersonal. It was what they expected. It was what they thought they were owed. No, my gift would be something they could never spend but would never be able to forget. It would be a legacy. His legacy. I took out my phone and made a series of quiet, efficient calls. The first was to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn, who had helped me incorporate my business. "Evelyn," I said, my voice calm and measured. "I need to set up a charitable fund, an educational scholarship to be exact, and I need the paperwork drawn up and emailed to me within the hour. It's an emergency." Evelyn, bless her, didn't ask too many questions. She knew my family history. She simply said, "Tell me the name of the fund and the mission." "I'll handle it." I gave her the details. The David Miller Legacy Scholarship for Landscape Architecture. It would provide a full-ride scholarship each year to a promising student from a low-income background who wanted to pursue the same career I had. The kind of student I once was. The initial endowment would be for $50,000, the exact amount my father had left me. The second call was to my cousin, Chloe. "Chloe," I said, "I'm at the reception. Something has happened, and I need a favor. Can you connect with a few of Dad's old friends who are here? The ones from the history department, his poker buddies. I need you to quietly tell them that I'll be making a special announcement during the gift portion of the evening in honor of my father. Just plant the seed. Tell them it's something he would have been very proud of." Chloe, with her intuitive understanding of our family's undercurrents, immediately agreed. "I'm on it, Lily. Is everything okay?" "It's about to be," I replied, a small smile touching my lips for the first time that day. The final call was to the band leader for the reception. I found his number on the wedding itinerary. I introduced myself as the bride's sister and the event designer. "There's been a slight change to the schedule," I said smoothly. "After the main toasts, I'll be making a short presentation. I'll need a microphone, and for you to be ready to play a specific song on my cue. It's a song that was very special to my father." By the time Evelyn's email came through with the official, beautifully designed charter for the scholarship fund, I had my plan in place. I used my work tablet to wirelessly connect to a local print shop and ordered a high-quality, large-format print of the charter's title page to be framed and delivered to the venue within the hour. The cost of the rush job was exorbitant, but it felt like the best money I had ever spent. I finally walked into the reception hall. Just as my mother had requested, I went straight to the head caterer and confirmed that everything was running smoothly. It was. The room looked stunning, a perfect execution of my design. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pride, which was quickly replaced by a cold resolve. I was no longer the designer of this event. I was a guest with a purpose. I found my seat. They had placed me at a table in the back, near the kitchen, with a collection of my parents' distant cousins. It was another slight, another clear message of my status. But instead of feeling hurt, I felt a sense of strategic advantage. From here, I could see the entire room. I could watch them at the head table, my mother, Sarah, and Mark basking in the glow of a celebration funded by a person they had deemed unworthy of a seat at their side. They were so busy being the center of attention that they never once looked my way, never noticed my late arrival, never questioned why I wasn't circulating among the guests. They had forgotten about me, and that was their biggest mistake. The pieces were all in place. The legal document, the support of my father's friends, the perfectly timed presentation. I wasn't just planning to give a gift. I was planning to reclaim my story. The reception unfolded like a perfectly staged play. The dinner was served, the wine flowed, and the air buzzed with laughter and conversation. I sat at my remote table, making polite small talk with my distant relatives, but my focus was entirely on the head table. I watched my sister laugh, her head thrown back in performative joy. I watched my mother dote on her, adjusting her veil, whispering in her ear. They were the stars of the show, blissfully unaware that the script was about to be flipped. Finally, after the main course plates were cleared, the maid of honor and the best man gave their toasts. They were sweet, generic speeches filled with predictable anecdotes. Then, the DJ, following the original schedule, announced, "And now, the bride and groom would like to thank everyone for coming." After which, we will move to the cutting of the cake and the presentation of gifts. My mother leaned over and whispered something to the DJ. He nodded and then spoke into the microphone again. "My apologies, folks. A slight addition. Before the cake, the bride's older sister, Lily, would like to say a few words and present her gift to the happy couple." A smattering of polite applause rippled through the room. All eyes turned to me. I saw my mother give me a tight, expectant smile. I saw Sarah look over, a flicker of curiosity mixed with impatience in her eyes. This was it. This was the moment they were waiting for, the big financial payoff from the successful sister. I could almost see the dollar signs in their eyes. I walked calmly to the small stage, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. The framed document, which the print shop had delivered to me discreetly via a back entrance, was waiting for me on a small easel covered by a piece of silk cloth. I took the microphone, my hand surprisingly steady. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating through the silent room. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Lily, Sarah's older sister." I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the room before landing on the head table. "Sarah, Mark, today has been absolutely beautiful. Every detail is perfect, and I wish you both a lifetime of happiness." Sarah gave a little regal nod, as if accepting a compliment she was owed. My mother looked pleased. "When I was thinking about what gift to give you," I continued, "I thought about what people usually give at weddings. They give money for a down payment on a house, or for a lavish honeymoon. They give things, and things are wonderful, but they're also temporary." I saw a flicker of confusion on my mother's face. This was not going according to her plan. "So instead, I decided to give you something that will last. Something that will grow and create beauty in the world for years to come. A gift inspired by the person who isn't here with us tonight, but whose presence I feel every single day. My father, David Miller." At the mention of my dad's name, a hush fell over the room. I could see his old friends, the ones Chloe had spoken to, leaning forward in their seats. My dad believed in the power of education. He believed in giving people a chance, an opportunity to build a better life, just like he tried to give his children. He spent his life teaching, nurturing, and helping things grow. And in his final days, he entrusted me with a responsibility to carry on that legacy. "Oh," I walked over to the easel. "My family thinks my success came from nowhere. They think my business, Terra Firma Designs, just magically appeared. They don't know that the seed money for my company came from my father. It was his entire life insurance policy, a final gift he gave to me, and me alone, with the specific instruction to build something for myself." I heard a sharp intake of breath from my mother. Sarah's smile was gone, replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "For 5 years, I've honored his wish by building my business. But tonight, I want to honor the spirit of his gift in a much bigger way." With a flourish, I pulled the silk cloth off the easel. There, in elegant gold and black script, was the title page of the charter I had created just hours before. The words were large enough to be read from across the room. "The David Miller Legacy Scholarship for Landscape Architecture. Of my wedding gift to you, Sarah and Mark," I announced, my voice ringing with a newfound power, "is the creation of this foundation. In lieu of a personal cash gift, I have made the inaugural donation to this scholarship in your honor, an endowment of $50,000. The silence in the room was absolute. It was so quiet you could hear the ice clinking in the water glasses. My family at the head table was frozen, their faces a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. My mother's mouth was hanging open. Sarah looked like she had been slapped. "This scholarship," I continued, turning to address the guests, "will provide a full ride to a deserving, underprivileged student in our state every single year, helping them achieve their dreams in a field that my father knew I loved. It's a gift that will keep on giving, creating opportunity and beauty in his name. It is his true legacy." I looked back at my sister. "So, Sarah, while I can't give you a check for a honeymoon, I have given you something far more valuable, a way for our father's memory to live on, tied forever to your wedding day." And then, something incredible happened. In the back of the room, one of my father's oldest friends, a retired professor named Arthur, slowly got to his feet. He began to applaud, not loudly, but with a steady, deliberate rhythm. Then another of his friends stood up, and another. Chloe and my cousin stood up. Soon, all the people who had known and loved my father were on their feet. Their applause grew, swelling into a wave of sound that filled the entire hall. Guests who didn't even know him were standing, moved by the gesture. It was a standing ovation. For my gift. For my father. For me. I looked at my family. They remained seated, islands of stunned silence in a sea of applause. The honor and respect they had denied me my entire life was now being given to me by a room full of near strangers. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with humiliation and a dawning, horrified understanding. They had wanted my money, but I had given them a mirror, and the reflection they saw was not a pretty one. I placed the microphone back on its stand, gave a final, grateful nod to the applauding guests, and walked off the stage. I didn't go back to my seat. I walked straight towards the exit, my head held high. My performance was over, and for the first time, I had written my own ending. Walking out of that reception hall was like walking out of a prison I hadn't realized I was in. The warm night air felt clean and fresh against my skin, a stark contrast to the stifling, emotionally charged atmosphere I had left behind. The sound of the standing ovation was still ringing in my ears, a chorus of validation that soothed the raw edges of a lifetime of wounds. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see the fallout, the whispered conversations, the frantic attempts by my mother to regain control of the narrative. I knew what I would see: confusion, anger, and embarrassment. Their carefully constructed play had been spectacularly upstaged, and they had no idea how to improvise. I got into my car and just sat there for a moment, the engine off, letting the silence wash over me. A profound sense of peace settled deep in my bones. It wasn't the triumphant, fist-pumping feeling of victory. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the feeling of alignment, the sensation of my outer actions finally matching my inner truth. I had not acted out of revenge, but out of a need to honor my father and, in doing so, to finally honor myself. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. The first call was from my mother. I watched her name flash on the screen and felt nothing but a sense of distance. I declined the call. A text immediately followed. "How could you do this? You humiliated your sister on her wedding day. Call me now." I deleted it without a second thought. The second call was from Sarah. I declined that one too. Her text was more succinct. "I hate you." I actually smiled a little at that one. It was so predictable, so perfectly in character. The hatred wasn't really for me. It was for the loss of control, the shattering of her entitlement. The third call was from a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then answered. "Lily, it's Arthur. Professor Gould. It was my father's old friend, the one who had started the standing ovation." "My dear girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was the finest tribute to your father I have ever witnessed. He would have been bursting with pride. What you did tonight, it took incredible courage. A few of us are here at the hotel bar across the street. We'd be honored if you'd let us buy you a drink and toast to David properly." Tears sprang to my eyes. These were my people, the ones who saw. "I'll be right there," I said. For the next 2 hours, I sat with 4 of my father's dearest friends, men who had known him for over 30 years. They shared stories about him I had never heard, painting a portrait of a man who was not just a quiet father, but a beloved teacher, a loyal friend, and a man of deep integrity. They told me they had always seen the family dynamic, had always worried about the pressure placed on me. "Your father used to say you were his oak tree, Lily," one of them said. "Quiet and strong, providing shelter for everyone else. He just wished you had more sunlight for yourself." In that moment, surrounded by their warmth and genuine affection, I felt more of a sense of family than I ever had at the head table of my sister's wedding. The next day, I began the process of disentangling my life from theirs. I contacted my lawyer, Evelyn, and had her formalize the scholarship foundation. I also had her draft a letter to my mother and Sarah, officially stating that due to the events at the wedding, I would be ceasing all financial support, effective immediately. The letter was polite, professional, and non-negotiable. I spent the rest of the week in a creative frenzy, pouring all my newfound energy into my work. I finalized a major proposal for a public park project, something I had been putting off due to the wedding preparations. I felt lighter, more focused, more creative than I had in years. The mental and emotional bandwidth that had been consumed by managing my family's expectations was now free, and it was exhilarating. A week later, I received a package in the mail. It was a box containing every gift I had ever given my mother and sister since I started my business scarves, framed prints, pottery. There was no note. It was a petty, childish gesture meant to hurt me, to say, "We don't want anything from you." But as I looked at the box, I just felt a wave of pity. This was all they had left. This was the only language they knew: transactions, returns, and spite. I donated the entire contents to a local women's shelter. The silence from them was deafening and wonderful. No more panicked phone calls, no more passive-aggressive texts, no more demands on my time or my bank account. The quiet was a balm to my soul. I had left their world, and in its place, I was finally beginning to build my own. My new life didn't have a big, dramatic beginning. It started quietly, with the simple act of reclaiming my peace, one silent, uninterrupted morning at a time. The sun was finally shining on the oak tree. One year, to the day after my sister's wedding, I stood on a small, newly constructed stage in the center of the city's most beautiful public park. The sun was warm on my face, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the 100-year-old oak trees that surrounded the clearing. Behind me, a stunning new botanical garden, complete with a cascading water feature and a sensory garden for visually impaired visitors, was being officially dedicated. It was the largest and most challenging project my firm, Terra Firma Designs, had ever undertaken, and it was a resounding success. As I looked out at the crowd, city officials, donors, members of the community, and my team, I felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it almost brought me to tears. This was real. This was lasting. This was the kind of work my father had dreamed for me. He had wanted me to build something, and I had. This garden would be here for generations, a place of peace and beauty for thousands of people. After the ceremony, as people congratulated me, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Professor Gould, my father's old friend. He came over and gave me a warm hug. "He would be so proud, Lily," he said, his eyes twinkling. So proud." He then handed me a program from the event. "Speaking of pride, I thought you'd want to see this." He pointed to a small advertisement on the back page. It was for the David Miller Legacy Scholarship. Underneath the title, it read, "We are proud to announce our first ever recipient, a brilliant young woman named Maria Flores, who will be attending the State University this fall." My heart swelled. It was happening. My father's legacy was alive and growing. My life over the past year had been one of quiet, steady construction. My business had taken off in the wake of the publicity from the scholarship announcement. It turned out that many of the guests at the wedding were influential people in the community, and the story of my gift had spread. They saw integrity and purpose in my actions, and it translated into new, exciting projects for my firm. I had finally paid off the last of my student loans, and had even started saving for a down payment on a small house with a yard of my own. I was dating someone new, a kind and grounded architect named Ben who respected my work and cherished my independence. My life was full, not with drama, but with purpose, creativity, and genuine connection. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, had been completely razed to the ground, and the rebuilding process was slow and uncertain. For the first 6 months, there was absolute silence. I heard through the family grapevine, mostly from my cousin, Chloe, what was happening. Sarah and Mark had returned from their modest, self-funded honeymoon to a mountain of debt from the wedding. Without my final contribution, and with many of their vendors demanding payment, they were forced to take out a high-interest loan. The financial stress immediately began to poison their new marriage. Mark, who had believed Sarah came from a well-off family, was shocked to learn that the entire wedding had been built on a foundation of my expected generosity. The arguments were, according to Chloe, epic. My mother did not handle the fallout well. With me no longer in the picture as her emotional and financial backstop, all of her focus and her neediness shifted to Sarah. But Sarah, overwhelmed by her own problems, had no patience for it. Their codependent relationship began to fracture under the strain. My mother, for the first time in her life, was truly alone with her choices. The first crack in the silence came 7 months after the wedding. I received a handwritten letter from my mother. It was not an apology, not really. It was full of justifications and explanations of how she had only wanted the best for Sarah. But buried in the last paragraph were 3 words I never thought I would read. Maybe I was wrong. It was a tiny opening, a crack of light in a door that had been sealed shut. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I talked it over with my therapist, a practice I had committed to after the wedding. I realized I could engage, but it had to be on my terms. I wrote back a short, polite letter, stating that I was open to meeting in a neutral location, but only if we could have a mediated conversation with a family counselor present. I would not step back into the old dynamic unprotected. To my astonishment, she agreed. The first few sessions were painful. My mother cried and accused. I calmly stated facts and described how her actions had made me feel. But the therapist was skilled, and slowly, painstakingly, we began to build a new foundation. She started to understand, on an intellectual level at least, the profound imbalance she had created. The real breakthrough came when she admitted her own deep-seated insecurities, her fear of not being a good enough mother, which had caused her to overcompensate with the more demanding, difficult child, while taking the quiet, capable one for granted. My sister, Sarah, was a different story. Her marriage to Mark ended just shy of their 1-year anniversary. The debt was too much, their foundations too shallow. She moved back in with my mother. A humbling and difficult experience for both of them. She reached out to me once via a long, rambling email, which was equal parts apology and blame. She was sorry for how she treated me, but also angry that I had sabotaged her wedding and her marriage. I replied simply, "I wish you peace, Sarah. I hope you find it." I knew her journey of self-awareness would be much longer and more difficult than my mother's. I established a firm boundary. I would be civil at family holidays, for Chloe's sake, but I would not be her friend or her savior. That chapter was closed. Today, my relationship with my mother is a work in progress. It's not the warm, easy relationship I once dreamed of, but it's honest. She is learning to see me as an individual, not just a role I play in the family drama. We meet for lunch once a month. She asks about my business. She asks about Ben. She is trying, and for now, that is enough. The justice I received wasn't the kind you see in movies. It wasn't a dramatic courtroom victory or a public shaming. It was quieter, more organic. It was the natural consequence of their actions and the beautiful, thriving life I had built in the space their absence created. They had lost their pillar, and their world had become unstable. I had lost my burden, and I had finally learned to fly. As I look back on that insane year, from the planning of that wedding to standing in the park I helped create, the biggest lesson I've learned has nothing to do with money or gifts. It's about the stories we tell ourselves and the roles we agree to play. For 31 years, I had accepted the role of the responsible one in my family's story. I was the supporting actress, the one who made sure the star, my sister, always had perfect lighting. I believed my worth was directly proportional to my usefulness to them. My purpose, I thought, was to fix, to provide, to support, and to ask for nothing in return. That day at the church, when my own mother dismissed me from a family photo, wasn't just an insult. It was a liberation. In that moment, she handed me a new script, one where I was no longer a character in their story, but the author of my own. The standing ovation at the reception wasn't just for the scholarship. It was for the act of authorship. It was a room full of people recognizing someone who had finally picked up the pen and written herself a new ending. My father's letter was the catalyst, but the choice was ultimately mine. I could have given them the money. I could have swallowed the hurt and continued to play my part, preserving the fragile peace of our dysfunctional family. And for what? A few crumbs of strained affection? A seat at a table where I was never truly welcome? I realized that true family isn't about obligation or blood. It's not about who you're born to, but who sees you, who values you, who respects you enough to let you be the main character in your own life. My father saw me. His friends saw me. My cousin Chloe saw me. My new partner, Ben, sees me. And finally, most importantly, I learned to see myself. The scholarship has become the most fulfilling part of my life. I met Maria, the first recipient, a few weeks ago for coffee. She is a bright, ambitious young woman who grew up in a tiny apartment with 3 siblings, sketching garden designs on scrap paper. She told me that getting the scholarship was like being told for the first time that her dreams were not just possible, but important. As I listened to her talk about her plans, her passion, I saw a reflection of a younger me, but a version of me that had a helping hand, a little bit of sunlight to help her grow. This, I realized, is what my father meant by build something that lasts. It's not about stone and soil. It's about nurturing potential. It's about creating cycles of opportunity instead of perpetuating cycles of dysfunction. My family is still learning to navigate their new reality. They spent a lifetime leaning on a pillar, and they're still finding their balance now that it's gone. I have hope for my mother. Her willingness to go to therapy is a testament to a desire to change. For my sister, I have a more distant hope, the hope that one day she will find her worth within herself, not in the attention or resources of others. But their journey is no longer my responsibility. My responsibility is to the life I've built, to the business I've nurtured, to the partner I cherish, and to the legacy of kindness and integrity my father entrusted to me. My garden is finally my own, and I will only allow people in who are willing to help it grow, not those who seek to trample the flowers to get a better view of themselves. So, I want to ask you all a question. Have you ever had a moment where you had to completely redefine your role in your family or your relationships to protect your own peace and your own future? What was that breaking point for you? And what did you learn from it? Share your stories and your wisdom in the comments below. I read every single one, and your experiences give strength to so many others. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the invisible support system in someone else's life, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about overcoming challenges and reclaiming your own narrative. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that their worth is not determined by their usefulness to others, but by the simple, powerful fact of who they are. Thank you for listening. Remember to be the architect of your own life. Even if you have to start from scratch, the garden you build for yourself will always be the most beautiful.